Okay. Hello, I am Bob Bradley. I am a retired professor from the Political Science Department at Illinois State University. Joining me today in a casual chat is Al Bowman, who is the former president of Illinois State University and the former executive director of the Illinois Board of Higher Education. What we're going to do today is proceed in sort of a question and answer casual chat. Before we start, I want to thank the senior professionals at ISU and the Office of Alumni Engagement at ISU for helping to put this together. Uh, to start us off, I thought it would be very timely and topical to ask your thoughts about the killing of George Floyd and the national and international reaction to it.
Yeah, like everyone else, I was deeply troubled by the video, and I think the fact that people have rallied and participated in peaceful protests uh, in order to speak out against this injustice is very positive. Um, I think in 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 any large organization like police forces, you're always going to have people who have jobs they shouldn't have, who really aren't equipped to be police officers, and that's to be expected. They're human beings. The problem is that these people have not consistently been held accountable, and it's the accountability factor that I think is prominent here. Um, yeah, as a society, we've made tremendous progress in racial relations. Um, I think back to my childhood and going to a segregated grade school in West Virginia. We're a very different place today than we were back in the late 1950s. Having said that, we still have a long way to go. But I don't think this killing negates all of the good positive progress that we've made as a society. Um, I think one of the things that this incident highlights is that in every culture there is always a group that is branded as the other, and even in cultures where even in societies where everyone is of the same color, you still have this attempt to stratify society. And you look at the brutal killings between Hutus and Tutsis in Africa, the caste system in India. There is, unfortunately, among human beings, we always find a way to brand a group as the other. And if there's something that the human race collectively has to learn to not do, is just that. And we're making progress, but we've got a long way to go.
Okay. Some would state that part of the progress in racial relations was the fact that you became the first African American president at Illinois State University. What would your response be to that?
Yeah, I think it reflects again how far we've come as a society. Um, my experience as president of ISU was completely positive, and the fact that the Illinois State community, both the campus community and the alumni community, the business community, the fact that they embraced the work that I was doing on behalf of the institution, I think speaks volumes about the kind of institution that we've created. I, as I look at my 10 years as president, not there, I can't point to a single racial incident during those 10 years. Now, I had, like anyone else, I had people say things to me that were insensitive, but it was 110% positive. And if I could relive my life again, I would do it all the same.
Oh, that's neat. Now, shifting gears just a bit, for our viewers who may not be very familiar with the Illinois Board of Higher Education, I was wondering if you could describe briefly what its mission is.
Sure. Um, at least the way it is today, it's different than it was prior to 1996. But today, it's really a coordinating board. It's not a governing board. Um, One of the things that Governor Edgar did, I think, that was very positive, is that he transferred the governing authority from the Illinois Board of Higher Education to the individual campuses. And that still left the Illinois Board of Higher Education with a pretty large basket of responsibilities. And there is a coordinating function, of course. There is also a program approval function that is managed by that board. So any public university that wants to start a new program needs approval from that board in order to move forward. The other function that is not very visible but very important is the board has a consumer protection function that wherein any institution of higher learning that wants to operate in Illinois has to be granted operating authority by the board. And so there are staff members in Springfield who go out to proprietary institutions and evaluate them according to a set of criteria, and then the board grants operating authority. It's a consumer protection function that's extremely important because this is a space that fraudulent individuals use to exploit people not only in the United States but from around the world. And for example, when I was working in Springfield, we were dealing with an institution in Chicago that was really a front for a visa mill. And so the institution presented itself as an institution of higher learning, and instead what it did was it collected money from foreign nationals, gave them student credentials that allowed them to enter the United States, and then once those students entered, the institution had virtually no programming for those students, and the students would just melt away into American society, and so that kind of criminal activity is investigated by the board, and of course the Attorney General's office gets involved in those kinds of things.
And I wondered if you could tell us what your responsibilities as the executive director of the IBHE were.
Well, one of the reasons I took that job, and it wasn't just being bored in retirement, although retirement, there's nothing in retirement that can replace the excitement that comes from being professionally involved. But one of the reasons I took the job was part of the job of the director is to be an interface between higher education and the governor's office and the General Assembly. And I thought, as a former president, I could be a voice that would help the governor and members of the General Assembly who are involved in higher education, help them understand this enterprise, help them understand what our needs were, and really be a voice for higher education. My background was somewhat unique because I started in higher ed as a faculty member, eventually became a department head, and then on up the chain, provost, and finally president. And sitting in those different chairs gives you a unique perspective, and I thought I brought a perspective that most people wouldn't have in Springfield. So I spent a lot of time working with a group called the Higher Ed Working Group, and it's a group of legislators, both from the Senate and the House, who are interested in higher ed issues. and many of those people sat on appropriations committees. And so I spent a lot of time talking with them about what the needs were. And it's a voice that that's extremely important because most people, unless you've worked in an institution and been involved in the budget side, most people really don't understand why things cost what they do. Why does it take, why do universities spend 70% of their resources on personnel? And having sat in multiple chairs across campuses, I could address those issues head on from a knowledge base that most people didn't have.
In regard to that, one of the ongoing criticisms of the state of Illinois is the lack of funding for higher education. And given this working group, how did you try to, in a bipartisan way, make the legislators aware of that and perhaps more importantly, do something about it?
Sure. That probably the biggest frustration in that job was the difficulty in getting legislators to understand what's happened to higher ed over the last couple of decades. Higher ed, and one of the things that I would talk about pretty regularly in Springfield, is the fact that higher education is the only sector in state government that is receiving less money today than it did in 2002. And as an example, when I became president in 2003, the ISU state appropriation was about $92 million. And today it's 30 million less than that. And of course, we've replaced those state dollars with tuition dollars. And so we've created a brand new business model for public higher education, not only in Illinois, but across the country, but a business model wherein institutions are dependent on tuition. And President Dietz regularly talks about the fact that the state portion of ISU's budget is less than 20%. And of course, what that means is that public universities are highly dependent on enrollment, and any disruptions to that flow of enrollment will have immediate consequences on an institution's bottom line. And so as you look at this COVID-19 problem that we're facing, most institutions are predicting roughly a 20% drop in enrollment when the fall semester begins. And that, if that materializes, that will cost schools like Illinois State millions and millions of dollars. In addition to that, most universities are in a weaker financial position today than they were following the '08 financial crisis. And in fact, Moody's Investor Services, which regularly looks at the balance sheets for universities across the country, Moody's is saying that only about 500 of the 4,000 colleges and universities across the country are on a sustainable financial path. And I think fortunately Illinois State is one of those institutions that is in pretty good shape. But anything that causes a major disruption in enrollment will have immediate consequences. And of course, as I've read media reports about what's going on campus, on our campus, the institution is looking for ways to cut costs, and ultimately that's likely to have an impact on employment.
Right. And with the sort of the ever increasing dependence on tuition dollars, there's an interesting sort of recent movement now where it's saying that you really don't need to go to college to get a good job. that
Sure.
you have to go to, you can go to a vocational place or a trade school or do something else. And how do you think how do you think public universities should respond to that message? Because that message seems to be played more and more now.
Sure. Yeah, I'm troubled by that message, and I think higher education is partly at fault for some of the blowback that we've gotten. This notion that every single high school senior should go to a 4-year residential campus really doesn't make any sense. The message that higher ed should have been promoting all along is that given the changes in what's required uh, to attain a middle class lifestyle, post secondary training of some kind is absolutely necessary. And that may be a college path, that may be vocational path, uh, but I think helping the public understand that college is one of many paths is the way to go. In terms of the bachelor's degree itself, I think higher ed needs to do a better job of helping the public understand what the real benefits are, and the benefits are not only economic but also life expectancy, and this notion that the typical individual with a bachelor's degree um, earns more than $1 million more per lifetime as a result of that training is extremely important. But they also are healthier, and life expectancy is certainly greater. Um, I think there's sort of an underlying political motive to some of the anti-higher ed rhetoric, and I think people need to be better informed so that they can separate fact from fiction.
Yeah, well, that probably cuts across many, many issues right now.
Yes,
The ability to separate fact from fiction and critical thinking are, I think, absolutely essential to part of what you get in a liberal arts education, regardless of your major.
right.
Uh, Given that ISU, to conclude the previous semester and likely for the fall semester, is going to depend a lot more on electronic virtual learning than it's probably ever done before, how would you say universities would respond that that's not really classroom education and that it's sort of diminished in value?
Yeah, as you as you read media reports about students' reactions to having their courses placed completely online, it's clear that a number of students are less than satisfied with what we're doing right now. And certainly in this environment, we're fortunate to have these electronic options that allow us to continue to educate students. So that's certainly a positive. Um, in my opinion, really nothing can completely replace uh, the interaction that takes place between a professor and a student in a classroom, and the relationships that can be built outside of that classroom. Uh, I think going forward, it's likely that the fall semester and beyond will involve some sort of hybrid approach where students will have some uh, uh, in-class instruction as well as the online environment. Um, I think the worry for everyone in higher ed is that students who are first-generation students, students from lower income families, students whose preparation wasn't as rigorous as it should have been in high school, those students are at risk. And the online environment uh, is not as conducive to the kind of support that those students need. And as universities use this online environment to a greater degree, the need for student support services will actually be even greater in the future. And so the cost to institutions going forward could actually increase, despite the fact that we're delivering this product online.
Right. And I fully agree with you in the sense that not every student is well suited to an online learning environment. And I've noted that I taught some classes quite a while ago online, and I noted that right off the bat that some students do well, and you have to be very conscientious, you have to be very self-motivated to do good in an online course. Those who are not, first year students oftentimes really don't know what it is to be a college student,
Right.
and exposing them to an online environment as their first encounter with higher education, I think could end up being sort of problematic.
Yeah, if the online shift continues for a long period of time, I think unfortunately we'll see first year retention rates take a pretty big dip, and it will take an awful lot of resources and work on the part of institutions to make sure that that doesn't happen.
Right. Uh, Given the consumer protection aspect of the IBHE, do you think it's going to take on an even stronger role when certain institutional entities try to take advantage of the online learning emphasis and become sort of diploma mills even more than what's been in the past?
Sure, that's always a concern, and fortunately, most of the institutions in Illinois uh, do a good job, and they follow the rules, and they produce graduates who have a meaningful credential. And it's a very small percentage that that are abusive. And so, as I look at what's going on in Springfield, what will be important is that the enforcement functions of groups like the Illinois Board of Higher Education not be diminished. And there will be a lot of pressure on state government to reduce costs, but I think this is an area where consumer protection should outweigh the desire to save a few dollars.
And one of the concerns of the Illinois Board of Higher Education, and I think it was one of your big concerns when you became the director, is what appears to be the increasing trend of high school seniors in Illinois going out of state to pursue their higher education degrees. And what do you think can be done to address that?
Sure. Um, I think this is largely a competitive issue, and one of the things that has happened over the years, probably beginning in the 1990s, is as the pool of 18-year-olds gradually began to shrink. Um the competition for students, particularly in the Midwest and in the East, became very intense, and the uh, the sort of consistent reductions in state support for public universities in Illinois resulted in steep tuition increases. And so students found themselves in a situation in Illinois where states around us were offering very attractive um, uh, pricing structures, and they began to vote with their feet. And for example, in Southern Illinois, one of the major competitors for Southern Illinois University at Carbondale is Murray State University. And in the case of Murray State, they were offering Illinois residents tuition rates that were actually lower than in-state rates at Carbondale. And that situation has occurred in other universities in Illinois that are near border states. And so we're looking at an extremely competitive environment, and and unfortunately, we're losing uh, nearly half of our college-going high school graduates to other states. And when I was in Springfield, one of the things that got Governor Rauner's attention was the fact that Illinois had gotten away from merit-based scholarships for Illinois residents. And so we revived a small scholarship program that rewarded students who graduated in the top 10% of their high school class. Some additional money was put into that program this year. And I think that program is an example of a good place to start. But the competition for students is going to continue to be intense going forward, and particularly in places like Iowa. Iowa doesn't produce enough high school graduates to meet the enrollment demands for all of its public and private universities. And so they heavily recruit in the Chicago area, and same thing is true for Indiana and the other states around us. Part of what's happened, unfortunately, is that some universities in Illinois, because of decisions that their leadership teams made over the years, I think became less attractive to Illinois residents. And I look at SIU Carbondale as a good example of an institution that the administrations there over the years really focused heavily on graduate and professional schools, and in my opinion, were less focused on their bread and butter undergraduate experience, and so as money went into graduate programming and other areas, the undergraduate experience became less attractive, and students voted with their feet. The difference at Illinois State is that you'll remember the the Educating Illinois initiative and all the strategic planning that took place during the late 1990s. Illinois State is a good example of a public university, regional public university that really focused on its strengths and built its reputation in such a way that it remained attractive to Illinois residents. And so of all the public universities in Illinois, only the University of Illinois system and Illinois State University have maintained stable enrollments over the years. And I don't think it's an accident. I think it's a product of those two large entities having stable leadership that understood what their strengths were, and they were able to attract enrollment, whereas in places like SIU, Carbondale, Western Illinois University, Northern Illinois University, all those institutions saw tremendous enrollment declines that they still have not recovered from.
Right. I had some experiences with SIU Carbondale because I was the university pre-law advisor, and the law school at SIU really liked us because oftentimes their top students in the law school came from Illinois State. And when I went down, they actually brought me down a couple of times, and I was struck by how much the law school tried to separate itself from the undergraduate institution. And I told people, I think if they could have built a moat and a wall, they would have done it to separate themselves. The other thing that I thought one of the strengths of ISU is the fact that you have full professors teaching entry-level classes, freshman classes, large classes. And in a lot of institutions, that just is not the case, that you generally have graduate students, TAs doing that. And I always thought that was a big strength of the university.
Yeah, it is. And it's not lost on parents. I think Illinois, one of the magical elements of the Illinois State University experience is that we've been able to incorporate elements of an expensive private school experience into a large public university. And so having smaller classes that are taught by senior members of the faculty, minimal reliance on teaching assistants. Those things have gone a long way in helping us build a reputation and attract strong students. Um, those small decisions that universities have made over the years, unfortunately, have come home to roost in 2020. And who would have guessed 20 years ago that Illinois State University would have thousands more students than Northern Illinois University? You have an institution in DeKalb that's 50 miles away from one of the largest cities in the Midwest. And they weren't able to capitalize on their location. And in my opinion, you can point back to decisions that their senior administration made that unfortunately didn't pan out. And a small decision, I'll give you an example. When I was president, Northern Illinois University was transitioning to 1A football, as we used to call it back then. So the FBS division of football. And in order to do that, you had to have a stadium that sat at least, I believe, 25,000 fans. Your average attendance had to be at least 15,000 per game. You had to offer additional scholarships. The financial consequence was enormous. And while it was certainly it is an aspirational goal for Illinois State University, we didn't take that plunge because we thought the investment was too great. And we felt like we needed to spend our resources in other places, and here we are.
Mm-hmm. Right. A few years ago, I had heard, and you could probably verify whether this was true or not, that Southern Illinois, to address the competitive disadvantage they thought they were at, was giving out iPads to each student that actually came to the university. And I think that only happened 1 year. And I don't know if they're continuing any type of perk-like program like that anymore or not.
Yeah, I suppose when times are desperate, people are willing to try anything. I look at Illinois State University and the reputation, the facilities, the undergraduate experience, the quality of housing and dining options, the developments that took place in Uptown Normal, which the university was part of. The Marriott Hotel is sited on land that the university at one point owned, and we helped facilitate that transfer of land so that hotel could be built there. This is an institutional body that made a lot of very good, sound decisions many years ago, and that's why we've been able to withstand the budget impasse during the Rounder administration, the '08 financial crisis, and the university will find a way to get through the current crisis.
Okay. Well, with that, what do you think? What are your thoughts on what the future of higher education in Illinois will be? Will we see a decline in the number of universities? Will we see a growth in community colleges? There's a variety of things out there that are occurring that are sort of interesting to predict what is higher education going to look like in this state.
Yeah, I think we've predicted what's happening now has been predicted for a long, long time. And I was fond of telling audiences back when I was president that what's likely to happen in Illinois is that the strong players will get stronger. They'll capture a greater percentage of enrollment, and the weak players will unfortunately need to right size and essentially downsize so that their campus operations better reflect their enrollment and the revenue that's associated with that enrollment. And we're certainly seeing that. I think likely in the future, a number of the public institutions that have had enrollment challenges will see their operations shrink, and so that they're in a better financial position to manage enrollments that they can realistically achieve. I don't think we're likely to see any closures. The politics of closing a regional campus are such that it's a hurdle that I don't think can be overcome. And in many cases, the economic impact of campuses on regions are so great that it would actually do more damage to close a campus like Macomb or Carbondale than it would be to keep them open.
Mm-hmm. Now, one of the things that I always thought in regard to the politics of higher education in the state of Illinois is that every four-year public university was downstate, was in a district that was led by a Republican. And I always thought that that was sort of interesting.
Sure. Yeah, we're fortunate here at Illinois State because our representation, our political representation in Springfield has always been extremely supportive. And the case for example, Representative Dan Brady, because of his seniority, he sits on appropriation committees for higher education. So he has been extremely helpful, and in particular, he has the ability to work with both sides of the aisle, and whether there's a Democrat in the governor's office or a Republican, Dan is one of those people that can help advance Illinois State's interests.
I always thought Representative Brady, the one area where I knew he was critical was the renovation of Schrader Hall and getting the funding for basically the completion of the classrooms in the hall, that he was critical on that.
When that funding was approved, Governor Blagojevich was in office, and when I took over the presidency in June of 2003, I spent that entire summer trying to figure out a way to get the dollars for Schrader released. And one of the individuals that was extremely helpful in that was an alum named Jay Hoffman, who represented a district in Southern Illinois, and he and Governor Blagojevich were very close, and that relationship helped us gain an audience with the governor, and that the Schrader project was the only higher ed capital project that he released that year.
Wow. Yeah. I remember Jay Groves approaching me to give introductory comments to sort of praise Governor Blagojevich in regard to Schrader Hall. And that was at the same time that my wife was in the crowd protesting. People that knew we were married thought that that was just very hilarious.
Certainly Governor Blagojevich, his reputation, unfortunately, was just ruined by the criminal activity. On the positive side, he appropriated, or I should say, he released over $50 million in capital projects for Illinois State while he was governor. So he was very, very generous to our Normal campus, and it largely was due to the relationship that Jay Hoffman had with him.
Well, that's good. Well, I was just wondering, how are you and Linda dealing with the stay-at-home order? How has that affected your guys' lives?
Yeah, we're taking it very seriously, and I'm 67 years old, and so I'm in the high risk group, and I've just been very, very cautious. We shop for groceries once a week. We seldom order carry out food, and we're very religious about wearing masks and hand washing and all of that. Uh, we're fortunate that we have the resources to be able to shelter in place, but we've not traveled and certainly are not contemplating any air travel. We have a daughter in Denver and one in San Francisco. The Denver daughter came home and stayed with us for about a month, and now she's back at work. But you know, it's been challenging, but I think we consider ourselves fortunate that that we haven't been forced to do things that are unsafe.
Yeah. It's interesting because as being retired, it hasn't really dramatically affected my life because I'm not having
Exactly.
to go to work and things like that.
Yeah. You know, like most former faculty members, my my day-to-day life is largely solitary. I spend a lot of time reading, and it's kind of what I've done my entire career. So the the change in my day-to-day existence has not been that great. We can't travel, and that of course will change. Um, I It's been frustrating to see how many Americans are still skeptical, and that you know, the consequences, of course, can be deadly.
Right. And that's one of the things that has bothered me a fair amount is when you have leaders of certain localities saying that we're going to open up as normal despite what the governor or, and this is not only happening in Illinois, it's happening in a variety of other places. We have a part-time residents down in Florida, and the beaches by us have been opened and then closed, then open, then closed. And it's all because certain people just see more value in getting tourist dollars than
Sure.
public health.
Yeah. Yeah. I like everyone else, I'm afraid of a second wave in the fall. Um, but until we have either a vaccine or an effective treatment, we're going to be in this holding pattern. It's encouraging to see that Dr. Fauci indicated yesterday that there's a strong likelihood that we may have a vaccine with 100 million doses by January.
Well, that's great news. That would be incredible if that
Yeah.
in fact happened. So do you miss time out on the golf course?
Still playing a little bit of golf. Linda and I both like to play, and I'm glad to be able to ride in a cart again. The exercise, walking was nice, but it's just real comfortable to be in a cart, and just the ability to be outside is just so invigorating. I ride a bicycle, a road bike, and so I've been getting out and doing that. And exercise is making a huge difference.
Mhm. No, do you have any other thoughts you would like to share with viewers?
Well, I guess you know, I think everyone expects that for universities, the fall semester is going to be a challenge. I think it's difficult to say exactly what it will look like because the public health advice is a moving target, and it certainly will be over the next couple of months. Um, I think we should expect most institutions will see some enrollment declines. The strong players like Illinois State and University of Illinois system will certainly be able to get through this. And the weaker players, unfortunately, are in for a long struggle. And small private institutions that have a lot of debt and small endowments uh, and who are extremely enrollment sensitive are likely to struggle, and we may see some of those small institutions close.
Well, I want to thank you for taking the time and effort to participate in this. I want to thank the viewers for their commitment once again to lifelong learning, and for those institutions at Illinois State that have made this possible. So I hope you have a good day, and I will see you down the road.
Good to be with you, Bob. Thank you.